r/NoStupidQuestions. Stiblix says, why are so many Americans seemingly piss poor when they have a much higher disposable income than Europeans? I keep hearing stories about Americans needing second jobs and living paycheck to paycheck. But the median disposable income is a lot higher than countries like France and Germany and just below Scandinavia. A Little Danger says, dual US/Irish citizen here who also lived in Spain and South Korea. I've been to almost every EU country too. I'm going to speak of Europe generally for the purposes of answering the question. I should also say that this is actually a great question. A couple of reasons for me come to mind, and America is a pretty unequal society compared to other roped countries. I think only Mexico and Chile were worse. Just in my experience, I did not see the levels of inequality seen in the US. In neither Ireland, Spain, or South Korea. Although they are all getting worse too. Europeans live with their parents for much longer. This removes a lot of financial pressure that many Americans when it comes to housing. There is a major stigma for living at home in the US. Although it's starting to change, especially in really expensive cities like Nick, SF, and La. This leads to my next point, which is housing is expensive and getting more expensive in the US. Of course, housing in Europe is also expensive and in many cases more expensive in the US. When accounting for income, but without the stigma of living at home, there is less of a need for a second job. Americans also have kids one high earlier than Europeans. The US has one of the lowest ages for first-time mothers in the OCTIC. Way more teenage pregnancies in the US. Having kids as young is a very bad financial decision because kids are expensive and kids take up a lot of time to take care of. Time that would be much better spent getting yourself settled in your career. This means a lot of people get trapped in low-paying jobs because they don't have the time/resources to get out of it because all of it is going to their kids. Americans are pretty materialistic and prone to spending their money on all sorts of shit they don't need. A lot of Americans also get themselves into bad debt situations without any plan to pay it off. Few Americans can also be equally brilliant about managing money and growing wealth, and America has a lot more ways to build wealth than countries in the EU do. This is one of the main reasons I won't move back to Europe anytime soon. And from living for 4 years in Seattle, I can also say that Koreans are way worse about managing finances and way more materialistic than Americans are. America also doesn't have as strong a safety net as many European countries. Yes, there is public medical insurance and food stamps for really poor people, but the income cutoffs are pretty low, so there are still a lot of poor people who are basically completely responsible for themselves. Shitty public transportation in large cities. Besides Nick, there is really no metro area with public transportation that can compete with what you find in European cities. That means a lot more people rely on their cars, which adds to their expenses. Lastly, Americans also tend to really look down on those who don't make a lot of money. Much more than Europeans, especially Western Europeans. So anytime something gets proposed to help ordinary workers, it gets a lot of pushback, makers versus takers discourse. And it's not just conservatives. I live in San Francisco and well-off liberals, while better, are still pretty bad too. In my experience, the more openly woke, for lack of a better word, someone is on social media, the more likely it is that they look down on or are super condescending toward non-professional workers. Highly paid, highly educated urban professionals tend to get outsized attention in the Democratic Party, and this is one of the reasons why culture war issues are often front and center in progressive American discourse and economic issues are not, since economic issues don't matter as much for them. So this causes the problems to fester and never get fixed. I could probably think of more things, but I hope this helps you understand the situation more. Torlander Games 2 says, also in Europe people often get free college, so they don't have college debt sucking up half their income on debt payments. r/NoStupidQuestions. Mlafe says, at what stage in a relationship do you tell your kinks? Say that you had an embarrassing kink. At what stage would you tell your partner? I saw a post about someone telling their embarrassing kinks and was wondering when is the right time to tell your partner? Puzzlehiladedeer 858W says, like right around the time you become sexually active. What would be the point of waiting longer? Shank 409 says, exactly. I was very upfront and honest about my preferences. Told her if you're not into it I understand and we will go our separate ways. It's been 9 years and still hoping strong. Carlal13 says, I told my husband about mine before we had sex the first time. No reason to get attached to a person just for one of your kinks to be a deal breaker. Kranusa says, early on, or at least soon after you start having sex. If your kink is going to be a deal breaker, you might as well find out sooner rather than later. Present Examination 10 says, we sort of discovered ours together, so it's an ongoing dialogue. Venus Retrograde says, when you have sex on a regular basis and the relationship is already secure and stable. r/NoStupidQuestions. Cool Basis 8474 says, does anyone else purposely avoid the top results on Google, even though it's what you want, just because they're ads? Weaseltown says, yes, I scroll right past everything that says sponsored. Water is Golden says, ads are not what I want, so yes I purposely avoid them. Ridley himself says, I do avoid it, mostly because they have, a couple times, redirected me to phishing sites. Caps Lock username says, the one below the ads is the top result though. The ads used to be more clearly differentiated, but they've been changing them to be more dishonest and look closer to regular results to get more clicks. Every Caterpillar 945 says, I always click on all of them, especially for companies I don't like. It's not much, but it still costs them. Present Platypus 937 says, absolutely, it's like a mini rebellion against the system. Dodging those top ad results feels like outsmarting the internet, even if we end up clicking on them sometimes by accident. Thick Hips Tight Lips says, yep. Generally it's not what I want anyways. r/NoStupidQuestions. Nogajus says, could I seriously start a podcast and repeatedly say they are hiding kidnapped babies in the basement of the Alamo and not get in any trouble? Is there really no accountability for making outlandish claims? Buttercup 612 says, it depends. They are hiding kidnapped babies in the basement of the Alamo, probably okay. Bob Smith is hiding kidnapped babies in the basement of the Alamo, probably not okay. Bob Smith looks like the kind of person who would hide kidnapped babies in the basement of the Alamo, probably okay. I'm speaking about the legal aspect, not the morals. You have to make a pretty specific statement against a specific person of fact, not opinion. To get in real trouble for it, it has to be proven that you knew the statement was false when you made it, or ought to have known, because credible people informed you so. The person has to have suffered some kind of harm as a result of your statement, not just hurt feelings. Things like reputational harm, financial cost, threats to their safety, etc. It's a high bar to clear, to hold people responsible for what they say. I'm not a lawyer, this is just my understanding of how it works. Officer Chihiro says, or you can take the Tucker Carlson approach. Is Bob Smith of Franklin, Idaho hiding kidnapped babies at the Alamo? I don't know. I'm just asking questions. Stuva Groove says, I'm also not a lawyer, can confirm this is how I think it works. 382 WSA says, Anyone who's seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure will know you're not serious. And that's everyone, right? Pastad7 says. Well, look how long it took for Alex Jones's shit to catch up with him. A gentleman says. You can write a book and claim that there is a god who created the universe and wants you to ritually murder his son and eat his son's flesh and drink his son's blood and get praised for it. That is called free speech. Urban Myth says. Legally yes, assuming you live in a nation with free speech. You are legally allowed to make as absurd and outlandish claims as you likes, and the government can't do anything about it outside a few narrow exceptions. Now, you're not immune from social threats, that is. Everyone thinks you're nuts, and by extension, social consequences, for instance. People don't want to host your podcast anymore. And if you keep going, there's a chance you'll slip into one of those exemptions. See Alex Jones, who went from simple outlandish claims to outright slander and perjury. But apart from that, sure, you can say whatever you like. That's what free speech means. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.